At this very moment right here, Anthony Edwards was drafted as the number one pick for the Minnesota Timberwolves in the 2020 NBA draft, and from this moment on, Ant-Man has not looked back and has reached the status of a global icon and an NBA superstar. And what a career he's had so far. He's been a three-time NBA All-Star, two-time All-NBA player, has led the Minnesota Timberwolves to two Western Conference Finals, and became the third youngest NBA player to reach 10,000 points. As soon as Anthony Edwards set foot into the NBA, he was an absolute stud. He was putting all-star numbers since his rookie season, he was improving year by year, he was adding to his game, and slowly but surely, he turned the Minnesota Timberwolves from a losing organization to a winning organization. And finally, Anthony Edwards had dragged this organization to a playoff position, and they faced the Memphis Grizzlies in the 2022 playoffs in the first round. And the Minnesota Timberwolves versus Memphis Grizzlies series in the first round of the 2022 playoffs was a great series. Both teams were competitive, both teams fought their hearts out. However, Ja Morant and the Memphis Grizzlies proved too much for Anthony Edwards and the Minnesota Timberwolves, and they beat the Timberwolves in 6. However, Anthony Edwards had so many reasons to hold his head high, because in this series he averaged a whopping 25 points per game and also closed the series out with 36 points. There was a lot of reasons for Minnesota Timberwolves fans to be excited for about the future. And a year later, Anthony Edwards found himself in a similar position in the 2023 playoffs in the first round. But this time, the Minnesota Timberwolves faced the almighty Denver Nuggets, who had the star duo of Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic. And unfortunately for Anthony Edwards and the Minnesota Timberwolves, they lost against the Nuggets in 5. However, the performances that Anthony Edwards was putting up against the Denver Nuggets was something to be marveled at. The amount of 30 pieces, he dropped a 40 piece against the Nuggets. And if you look at a lot of the interviews the Nuggets players said at the time, they said that the Minnesota Timberwolves was the toughest series they played in that playoff run, and they eventually became champions. At this moment right here, everybody should have known that the Minnesota Timberwolves were real, and they were going to come and cause problems and noise in the West. The Minnesota Timberwolves and Anthony Edwards had kept on knocking on the door for a while, and eventually their moment had come, because in the 2024 playoffs in the first round, the Minnesota Timberwolves faced the Phoenix Suns, and they absolutely annihilated the Suns by sweeping them 4-0 in the first round. And the performances Anthony Edwards put up was something to be marveled at. He completely destroyed the Suns, consisting of a super team who had Kevin Durant, who was Anthony Edwards' childhood hero, Bradley Beal, and Devin Booker. The Minnesota Timberwolves weren't favourites in this series, but Anthony Edwards' performances and play really elevated the Minnesota Timberwolves and helped his team completely kill the Phoenix Suns. And now, Anthony Edwards has really solidified himself as a superstar in the NBA. But Anthony Edwards' run did not stop right here. In the same 2024 playoff run, Anthony Edwards faced the Denver Nuggets in the second round. They were the reigning defending champions, and Anthony Edwards took them to a Game 7 and beat them in a Game 7. And he had beaten the best player in the world in Nikola Jokic in a playoff series. And now the Minnesota Timberwolves reached the Western Conference Finals, and they faced the tough and mighty Dallas Mavericks with the star duo of Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic. And for Anthony Edwards, unfortunately, it was too much for the Minnesota Timberwolves to handle, and Minnesota lost in 5 against the Dallas Mavericks. And look, it was a very disappointing result for Anthony Edwards and the Minnesota Timberwolves, but this run showed that the young Minnesota Timberwolves were here to stay, and they were for real. And the fact that they reached the Western Conference Finals was a massive accomplishment. And at such an early stage of Anthony Edwards' career, he was generating a lot of hype and noise, and rightly so. He has accomplished so much so early in his career, to the point where he was drawing comparisons with the greatest of all time, Michael Jeffrey Jordan. And the comparison is quite fair, because both of them play quite similar, both are athletic freaks, both have charisma and personality. However, Anthony Edwards did not let all this hype get to his head. He did understand that he did lose in the Western Conference Finals to the Dallas Mavericks, and a lot of work was still to be done. And he did a lot of work during the off-season. He added that pull-up 3, and in the next season, he took it to the next level. And in the 2025 playoffs, in the first round, the Minnesota Timberwolves faced the Los Angeles Lakers. Due to the fact that the Lakers had superstars such as LeBron James and Luka Doncic, Minnesota Timberwolves and Anthony Edwards were heavily favored against in this series. However, Anthony Edwards was the best player in this series and willed his team to a 4-1 victory against the Los Angeles Lakers, and Ant-Man had finally got his revenge on Luka Doncic. The Minnesota Timberwolves now advanced to the second round of the 2025 NBA playoffs, and they played the mighty Golden State Warriors, who were previously a dynasty. They already won 4 championships under the leadership of Steph Curry. However, Steph Curry did get hurt in game 1 of this series, but the Minnesota Timberwolves had to take care of business whether Steph Curry was going to play or not, and that's exactly what Anthony Edwards and the Minnesota Timberwolves did. They gentlemen swept the Golden State Warriors and beat the Warriors in 5. And once again, in the 2025 playoffs, they have reached the 2025 Western Conference Finals. Once again, the Minnesota Timberwolves had found themselves in the Western Conference Finals, and this time they faced the Oklahoma City Thunder, who were the best team in the NBA. And unfortunately for Anthony Edwards and the Minnesota Timberwolves, the OKC Thunder destroyed them. It was such a convincing win from the Oklahoma City Thunder. Their defense was unbelievable. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander proved to the NBA why he was the MVP. And Anthony Edwards, he really struggled in this series due to the tight defense that the OKC Thunder were playing, and he couldn't really get his game off. And this was a rude awakening for Anthony Edwards because it showed that there was a way to slow him down. After losing 4-1 to the OKC Thunder in the Western Conference Finals, Anthony Edwards knew he had to put work in the offseason, and that's exactly what he did. 2 areas of improvement that he needed to focus on were his post game and his mid-range game, and that's exactly what he did. And in this NBA season, his mid-range and post work has been second to none, and he's been using that to execute in the clutch. And this season, Anthony Edwards has been the best clutch player in the NBA, and it's going to be very interesting to see how he fares in the playoffs this season, because I don't really see a weakness in Anthony Edwards' game or an area to improve, to be honest. Maybe the playmaking can be improved, but this is the most complete version of Anthony Edwards we've ever seen so far. And to dive further into how Anthony Edwards has been performing this season, he's having a career year so far. He's averaging 28.9 points per game, which is a career high, 5 rebounds, 3.8 assists. He's shooting a whopping 50% from the field, which is another career high. He's shooting 40.9% from the 3-point line, which is a career high once again. And this was a skill that he added last season, where he got that pull-up 3 and was shooting almost 40% from 3. But this year he's shooting over 40%, so he's improved there once again. His free throw percentage has declined a little bit by shooting 78.7%, but some of the most impressive numbers for me is the fact that within the restricted area, he's shooting 70.9%. That is insane. For a 6'3", 6'4" guard, shooting 70.9% from the restricted area is second to none. And in the paint, in the non-restricted area, he's shooting 50%. Bigs can't even shoot that efficiently in that area. He is having a generationally efficient season, and from the mid-range he is shooting 44.4%, and this is a massive improvement compared to previous years, because he normally shoots like 30 to 40% from the mid-range area, and now this season he's shooting 44.4%. So in every single aspect of his game, Anthony Edwards has taken a massive leap this year. At this point, there is no denying that Anthony Edwards is a superstar on the court, but off the court, he is a superstar too. And the one thing that makes Anthony Edwards stand out from the rest of his peers is the fact that he's signed by Adidas and has got his own signature shoes by the name of AE1s. And these shoes, they're selling out, they're popping, everybody wants to cop them. They've done brilliantly. And this is due to the fact that Adidas have done a brilliant job of marketing these shoes. The adverts that I see are so good in terms of the creativity, staying true to Anthony Edwards. They really show Anthony Edwards' personality. And I feel like when you look at other superstar shoes, you got the Kobe's, the Kyries, the LeBrons, the KDs. These are good shoes, but the marketing hasn't been the greatest. Whereas Anthony Edwards, the adverts, the marketing, everything's been on point. And in terms of the shoes themselves, aesthetically, they're great. They feel great. They're good to play in. They're good fashion shoes as well. So I feel like Adidas have hit the jackpot in Anthony Edwards. And all they need to do is keep pushing him. And all Anthony Edwards has to do is keep performing on the court. Because at the rate he's going at, he might be a superstar that might supersede time, like a Michael Jordan, like a Muhammad Ali, because these guys had the personality, but they also backed it on the court, and that's something that Anthony Edwards has too. Now that brings us to the end of the video. Anthony Edwards, he's already accomplished so much in his career. He's only 24 years old. He's made deep playoff runs. He's had iconic moments. He's got his own shoes. He's been in a movie. He's done a lot of things already in his career. Yet there's still so much things to do. He still needs to win an NBA championship. He still can win an NBA MVP. And it's scary how good this guy can really be, because since he's so young, there's still so much time left in his career, so much time to improve, so much time to accumulate as many accomplishments as he wants. And only time will tell how successful Anthony Edwards will be. But by the way he's going, it looks like he's going to be one of the greatest of all time. So yeah, that brings us to the end of the video. Thank you guys for watching. Like, share, comment, subscribe, and peace.